Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Todd Snelgrove. He is founding partner of Consultancy Experts in Value and former Global Vice President of Value for SKF. For over a decade, he's helped companies create, calculate, communicate, and get paid for value created. Todd is a noted subject matter expert, academic, and practitioner who has led the cultural change to realize the value of buying and selling based on quantified value. His recent best-selling book, Value First, Then Price, shows the roadmap of how companies can profit from the right value strategy consisting of tools, processes, skills, marketing, and business models that allow both buyers and sellers to become more profitable. By the way, even though Todd lives in the States, he's from Canada. So being from Boston myself, after this webinar, him and I will go back to being rivals so we can gear up for the big game tonight. So with that, Todd, welcome.
Thanks, Taylor. Go Leafs, go. So it's a hockey playoffs for those that don't follow it. So thank you very much, Taylor, and good morning, good afternoon to those that are joining us from overseas. I see a lot of people from Asia also signed up, so hopefully they're sleeping and just wanted a link to the webinar. So the people that you've signed up for this and registered for this, because you know the importance of quantifying value, and of course I'm going to talk about that, but you know, what's next? What do you have to do to get the benefits of doing the work? How do you make it a program that the whole company is behind to really move forward? You see a term at the top called total profit added. I'll explain that in a moment. It's really just an evolution of total cost of ownership. So I'll explain the difference and why and what it means. So as Taylor mentioned, almost 2 decades in being the value champion and driver at SKF and working across the whole business to try to figure out, if you create value, how do you get paid for it? And how do you get customers to engage so they understand that paying more might be better for them? So you'll see that the red colored text just popped up. I mean, I think there's 4 stages to value. It starts with creating something that is of value. And it's great for the technical people to sit in a room and come up with the newest widget. But, are they creating something that customer values? And by that, are they willing to pay for it? So really challenging the new product development process. Calculating value. I mean, there's a lot of research. If you can quantify value using the customer's numbers, close enough starting points, etc., their willingness to pay goes up and their ability to pay goes up. And as my old CEO would say, budgets are just a place to start. I can move and change budgets at will. So if a better business case comes in that I believe is realistic and the time frame's right and it hits my objectives, I'll reallocate money, or I'll even go borrow money if I have to. So whenever I hear, it's not in the budget, that means our business case isn't good enough. And maybe we can work harder to create more value for the customer. Real quick, funny story. I was talking to a medical company out of Asia that I did some work for, and they said, Todd, you got to hear, we just lost an order from a big hospital. This company made medical machinery, CAT scans, MRIs type things. And I said, oh, really? And what happened? He goes, we lost to a parking lot. And I started laughing. I said, what? And he goes, no, seriously, the CEO of the hospital chain, even though it's not for profit, decided that the funds were better allocated to building a new parking lot because of the revenue stream, the guaranteed, the probability of it, than buying whatever, a 3rd or 4th or 5th MRI machine. So you're not just competing against somebody that's selling what you're selling, you're competing against all other needs of that customer. Are we communicating that value effectively in our marketing material and the business cases we give to the buyer? The technical buyer understands probably what you're talking about, the reliability, the efficiency, the effectiveness, etc. But the economic buyer, the procurement person, and I spend a lot of time with procurement people, say, I don't know what this word reliability means. It's a neat word, but what does it mean? I understand dollars and cents. So instead of, saying they're wrong, they don't get it, let's just repackage what we do in different languages so different people can understand it. And I used to say capture value, because then there would be 4 C's. But it was Jim Anderson, a professor from Kellogg, Northwestern, that I do a lot of work with. He was one of the editors of Value Merchants, a great book a decade ago. But he said the problem with capture is it reinforces that it's a zero-sum game. Every time a supplier increases their price by 5%, the buyer is worse off by 5%. And I'll show you some research today, again, trying to get that mindset to change with your own sales force, but also with the customer, that both sides can win. It's not a zero-sum game. You can make a lot more money, and they can make a lot more money by creating more value, not at the expense of the other person. So you see the email address on the website and the visual of the book. What's kind of neat about the book is not only does it have, I think, 8 or 9 companies talking about what they do to adopt value quantification and value selling into their organization, but there's 4 or 5 chapters written by procurement people. Let's stop saying how we should sell. Let's ask them how they buy. So I want to cover some of that, but I think there's some real neat insights there that say, let's make sure we're talking their language and thinking about it. So in the book, you'll see this fishbone diagram twice. I was sitting with Jim Anderson, who's got 20 years, 30 years in the value mindset space, and myself. We were doing an executive MBA program together, and he said, Todd, why do you think, SKF's invested in you and the tools and the people and the processes, but why aren't companies, getting these huge increases, sales, profitability, customer satisfaction, these types of things? And we were sitting together, and very smart gentleman just said, let's think of this. I think, too often companies focus on the ability to sell value, specifically on the value selling process or the tool. And I get that a lot. If I'm on stage at a large conference, CEOs will say, if I just had a tool to quantify value, everything else would be in place. So they'll buy a tool, and then they'll say, why didn't it work? And don't get me wrong, a tool is a critical component of it. If you can't quantify it, the rest of it doesn't matter. But it's more of a starting point than the end point. So, are you creating products and services that really have value versus the next best alternative? Is it tied to your selling process? And I don't just mean tick a box in your CRM system, but are you being proactive? Are you being early? Are you being the thought leader in your space? Are you getting procurement people to think differently of how they buy so that when it gets to it, they're looking at total profit added or whatever methodology? Yes, it's great to have a kickoff sales initiative to come in and motivate the troops, but a lot of times it stops there. Or, the top-down approach of, the sales force is forced to do it. They have to do so many cases of value quantification a year. So they've been given the tools, they've given them the ability to do it, but do they want to do it? Does the market want to buy that way? And I think this is where I'm going to spend a lot more time on, but, funny enough, is the sales compensation of your team based on value or volume? If I'm measured on volume, I'll cut a price all day long. Most public companies, if they have a 10% net profit, net 10%, they're jumping up and down. As we all know, a 5% price cut is half that profit. Are we rewarding the person that fights for that extra few points? It's everything in a lot of markets. Are you giving your customers different value buying options? It's great to talk about how great you are, and then at the end, when the customer challenges you, saying, are you willing to put some fee at risk, et cetera, you say, well, no. I think we should give customers 2 or 3 choices of how they buy from us. It's all different on where they are in their life cycle and their needs at that time. But if you're talking about value, but you don't allow them to buy that value, maybe we're misaligned. The business culture internally, I was very lucky at SKF. Our CEO believed in it, talked about it all the time. It was in our annual report. We talked to our investors about it. He was on stage talking about it. But he said at one point in time, and maybe it wasn't delivered all through the key accounts and sales teams the greatest, but he said, we got to walk away from bad business. Chasing that volume doesn't work, and we've got to create the value. If the value isn't there, or the customer doesn't appreciate it, we need to pull away. And if your CEO is always talking about get an order load the factories at whatever cost, and then you've got somebody else saying sell value, you're giving 2 different messages in how you're compensating. And then I spend a lot of time still on the customer culture. Being invited by the biggest procurement associations in the world to say, how do I buy value? What should I look for? What should I negotiate on? Are they thinking differently? How do I buy? Whether that's IT, that's industrial parts, whether it's automobiles or services, I got to think differently of how I buy that. So today's discussion's around that. I always start off making sure that people are using the right terms. Price and cost are 2 different terms completely. People constantly misrepresent what they mean. Price is what you pay for something. Cost is what you pay, but all the positive and associated and negative costs, the shipping, the receiving, the installation, the obsolescence, the inventory, all those other things. And too often I hear people say, I need a lower price. The sales force needs to be confident to ask, do you need a lower price or a lower cost? Well, that's the same, or that's what I meant. No, let's define how do we measure cost, because that's a whole different discussion. I'll give you some statistics soon that show how price is usually a very small component of cost. Funny enough, quick story, procurement people will laugh. When they send out, the rebids, we're having a recession, how will you reduce my cost? they say to me, and this is generalized around the world, that most salespeople return with price cuts, terms and condition cuts, longer payment terms, price volume discounts, etc. So again, whenever you see that word, stop and think and be confident to challenge the customer. What word? And value, again, it gets overused all the time, and it's not the low price brand, but value is on the upside. How do I make that customer more profitable? And remember, profit is what a customer cares about. So some visuals, price versus total cost, and I think I'll revert here, yes, back to my old world. But again, you can use this on any industry or service. As a procurement person, I need to buy a widget, whatever that is, a computer, a belt, a gearbox, a car, I don't care. There's always at least two versions that meet that similar specification. They might have the same ISO specification. So there's one at $10 or $1,000 or $100,000, and there's one on the right that in this case is 50% more. And we used to let our sales force go out and try to explain what's better. The one on the left was going to use more operating costs, such as the lubricant or the energy or the inventory it would have to keep, or it wouldn't last as long. Again, you have to understand the whys behind this. And it might be the product or the knowledge you bring around the product. And the people on the right would go in and talk to a technical buyer and say, it'll use less lubricant because, and they'll explain it. I'm not an engineer and I won't even try to go into that. And maybe that is because of the product, or just, hey, you're over lubricating, you should use less lubricant. So the product might be different, or the knowledge around it. And if you're talking to a technical person and you say 10% less energy or increase the reliability, they'll nod and go, okay, I know that's worth something, and they'll do a subconscious calculation saying, that makes sense to me, that makes me happy. But when I talk to procurement and I say, okay, look at this, they don't know what is reliability worth. What is uptime worth? What is speed of installation worth? Whatever those things are. So total profit added includes the price and all the upside benefits and all the cost reductions. And in this case, I can model the one on the left, $10 and then $77 of OPEX cost and $57 for a profit generated impact of $30, the difference between the two. And, again, not the time to ask questions to the audience, but, all a customer could ask me then is, why do you get those numbers? What's the probability those numbers will happen? Where have they happened before? How will you measure those numbers? Will you willing to get paid on those numbers? Those are all closing questions. Again, they're walking right into having that discussion with me. And again, starting somewhere and saying min-max probability. Another thing for the marketing people, a lot of companies that are on the right, I'll ask them, how do you describe yourself? And they'll say, we're the premium company in this space. We're the Cadillac of cars, whatever. And I can tell you, being in enough procurement conferences, please never use the term premium. Premium to a procurement person means they're paying money for a logo with no tangible benefit, no business case beside it. And that's what they believe. So I want to position that I'm an investment. The only way to do an investment is to have an ROI calculation. Yes, you will invest $5, 50%, $5 million. But here's the probable payback, min, max, probable, etc. The Priceberg, great visual. A colleague put this together for me. And, price I can see, yes. But it's all those things below the waterline that people don't see that are the biggest numbers. And, are we doing a good job of articulating what those are and giving ranges of possible impact? I mean, procurement people love this slide. They go, we get it. I mean, procurement people are smarter than maybe we give them credit for, but they get it. They just don't know what numbers to put there. And as I say, you need to start somewhere. What's the probable and possible numbers? So whoever's got the smallest iceberg wins, not whoever's got the smallest tip of the iceberg wins. So, okay, specifically total profit added, an evolution of total cost of ownership. And again, I was doing this variation of this slide at Kellogg, and Jim Anderson said, Todd, I disagree. You're saying, here's how you should measure total cost of ownership, but it's wrong, and look at this. You've actually created a different definition, an evolution of total cost. I thought I was being academic. He goes, no, you're talking about how do you make your customers more profitable. Profit occurs by reducing costs, but also increasing revenue or value things associated with revenue. So it's tough going to the customer and saying total cost of ownership is maybe all the competitors are, and then we're defining it differently. To get somebody to stop and think, well, wait, what do you mean by that? You've got to call it something different. So, okay, the four stages I'll go through quickly from an industrial perspective, then I'll give you some examples because it's the same concept applied in different industries. So you have an OEM. people that take a bunch of parts and put them together to make an excavator or a car or an airplane, okay? And those engineers are supposed to be listening to the voice of the customer coming back from the sales force, and they're making design trade-offs. I mean, if you gave an engineer an unlimited budget, they could make the whatever last forever. They'd make it in diamonds, but it would last forever. But there's a trade-off on risk-reward probability. How easy will it be to manufacture? So there's trade-offs being made. But in the design phase, we're looking at how do I make the supplier more profitable? Maybe, you know, the market didn't know that they could have a machine that didn't need to be lubricated, or a machine that ran 2% less energy. I mean, maybe they didn't know it was feasible. They're not engineers. They just say, this is what I want. Okay, well, I only know what I want because I know what's available, but maybe there's something where a supplier could come in and help that customer make a machine that's different. And therefore, that OEM could sell that machine at a higher price or go for more volume. That would make that OEM more profitable. It wouldn't be a cost reduction. It would be a revenue enhancement. Okay, I'll stay with this example, then I'll come back and give you some other examples. So they're designing in the operating costs of the buyer. Acquisition phase. And I'll get a lot of procurement people that'll say, I buy in total cost. And this happened at SKF. Was asked to go work with our procurement team that buy whatever, 5 billion euros of things. And you can imagine a sales marketing person coming in to talk to procurement about how are we buying, but it was at the direction of the CEO. And the gentleman I worked with, Bo Inga, great guy, said, you know, we already buy this way. What are you going to teach us? And I said, Bo Inga, what do we measure and how do we make decisions? And he basically said, you know, the price of the product or service, the shipping cost, the minimum order quantity, the currency conversion, et cetera, terms and conditions, and whatever meets that specification will be the one we chose. And I said, okay, you're measuring acquisition cost, you're not measuring total cost. And it took a while, but we actually became very good friends. Bo Inga wrote a chapter in this book and another one that I was involved in. But somebody built it, now somebody bought it. The procurement team bought the laptops, not for themselves to use, but for their company to use. Okay? So it should say it gets installed, operated, and maintained, but ran out of space. And this will be different for everything that people buy or sell, but we've got to do the research. How much energy, how much lubricant, how much water, how much ink does it use? How long do we think it will last? A great one, what are the repair costs? You know, if I can predict when it will fail, it's much cheaper to fix it than letting it blow up. Does this machine that you're trying to sell me shut itself down, you know, before it blows up? That's much less expensive to fix. Can I get parts to fix this thing? If, again, it's a North American example, but the razor blade razor example, you know, maybe somebody sold me a cheap machine, but I can't get parts for it, or I can only buy the parts from the OEM, and that's where they're making all their money. You know, they give away the machine to make the money somewhere else. Now, the production amounts and quality yields not on here, but they're underlined because by definition, a cost reduction isn't increasing revenue. And I used to calculate it, but it's an average cost reduction because you're getting more tons of whatever produced. Either way, it was a convoluted way to try to quantify it or to get the customer to get it. You know, if I can increase your production, speed, yield, whatever it is, that's a profit improvement, not a cost reduction. Then you have installation costs, all these other things. And then you get to the disposal phase, which most of the academic research doesn't look at. I never did either. You know, maybe it's the Canadian mentality to throw it away. And some things, throwing it away, there is no cost. But I learned from people in the lubricant business, the cost to dispose of used lubricant is, and this is a rule of thumb, but 2.5 times the price to buy it. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, the government makes you prove how much you bought, where you used it, how you kept it. You have to hire somebody to come in and clean it and take it away. So I'm like, okay, interesting. Maybe we should, maybe I should have bought a machine that didn't need to have that big disposal cost. So this is an industrial version of total cost of ownership, including profitability. In the medical world, it's called total cost of care. I call it total cost of patient care just to kind of keep it straight in my mind. But a lot of medical buyers in the world, whether that's governments or healthcare companies, are saying, you want to know what? I don't mind paying more for that device or medication if it's got a higher effectiveness rate. There's less testing associated with it. There's less complication. It gets people in and out of the hospital quicker, et cetera, et cetera. So, government's saying, I'll pay more, but okay, they need less blood test afterwards to check it out. And again, they have to make some assumptions on what value of time is and all these things, but they're at least trying to change the discussion to having a more business discussion. The renewable energy world, levelized cost of energy. What's my total cost to build the generation power? How many kilowatts does it produce? So how much per kilowatt type thing. Real quick example, 4 or 5 years ago, I was in Europe somewhere at a renewable conference, and the way it works is a country will decide the type of generation they want, renewable or not. I think it was Sweden at the time had made the decision they wanted to be a country that had X percentage of their energy renewable. So then all the renewable people fight it out to say who's the best renewable. So you've got wind and tidal and solar energy and nuclear energy and I don't know, there's probably other ones, whatever. And it looked like when you looked at the cost to build the wind farm or nuclear plant, to operate it, nuclear was going to win. The cost per kilowatt, was going to be better over the life of the asset. It can produce more. But when they started to look at disposal costs, they went, wait a minute. And the reason why I knew this is because in Canada, we're trying to shut down a nuclear reactor, and the cost was 2 times more than it cost us to build the reactor 30 years ago, or 20, whatever it was years ago. So wait a minute, that's a cost. It's going to be incurred in the future, but that needs to be taken into consideration. So I'm not saying nuclear bad and wind is good, but you need to look at all the costs. And finally, give you an example. You're buying a car. Is it the price of the car that matters? $30,000 or $40,000? Or the operating cost, the fuel efficiency, the cost to repair it? But what about disposal cost? Some cars keep their value much longer than others. You can go to different websites that will actually track this, saying, okay, this car will be worth more, depreciates less. So conceptually, you can take this model and apply it to services also. Don't have the time here to go through a zillion examples, but you get the idea that any product or service walks through different phases. The questions are, where are the big costs? And luckily enough, if you do some research, it's amazing how you can generate insights. Of course, your sales force will have insights, but it's amazing by doing some outside research. So this is Accenture's research. It's probably 14 years old now. One of the white papers you're going to get access to actually has the date for this information, but it's close enough. And the purpose of their research was to get OEMs into the aftermarket to build their service portfolio, saying that's where the profit is. You're only playing in this percentage of the market. You need to play in the operation of your asset, to have a field service team part of your asset, to finance your asset, etc. Now, they've given us 4 areas here: commercial aircraft, so Airbus, Boeing, Bombardier; Class 8 trucks or big 18-wheelers, Mania, Scan, Volvo, the big ones on the highways; industrial equipment, fans, gearboxes, pumps; and light-duty pickup trucks. So this includes where labor is part of the cost, not for personal usage. And you can see the red bar, it's between 8 and 12%. And the operating costs, they don't really have disposal here, but the operating cost is between 92 and 88%. And what I ask people is, most companies will have a process in place all day long to look at that 12% and try to get that 12% to go down. And my question is it better to buy that product for maybe 10% more or 10% less? Or should I be focusing on that 88% and getting it down by 2%? And usually I get, well, Todd, 10% is bigger than 2%. But 10% at 12, you're going to buy a bunch of whatever, gearboxes, whatever it's going to be. A 10% reduction of 12 is 1.2%. But if maybe that machine lasted longer, was easier to maintain, the parts were easier to get. I don't know why. Somebody would have to do the research. The sales organization would need to do it. A 2% reduction of that 88 is 1.76. 1.76 versus 1.2, and you'll see these statistics played out in a bunch of different other examples, is about 45% more impactful. People are looking at the wrong number. It's our job to get them to look at the big number, the overall number, and say, wait a minute, let's look holistically at where the costs and benefits are. My colleague, the gentleman is a procurement gentleman, Rob McGuire, did this for me, and he said, okay, I'm going to index a bunch of different things. That's that purple line, the purchase price. I'm going to index it at 100 because, Todd, everything's got different weightings. I said, okay, point taken. And I'm not sure where the numbers come from, so let's just assume they're accurate, which I'm sure he did the research, don't get me wrong. But you can see, and again, I can't say where it came from, but in discrete semiconductors, the purchase price and delivery is a big cost of that product or service. Okay? A lot of people make assumptions, but in this case, it is. But you get down to office supplies and photocopiers, and the example here is, if I'm selling photocopiers or buying photocopiers, what should I be talking about? The price to buy the machine or the price to operate the machine? And, the question I ask in an audience, is it better to buy, the $300 machine or the $250 machine? Well, the $250. Well, wait, what's better, to buy the $50 ink or the $40 ink? Well, $40. You've made two assumptions. I want to know what the average cost per page is. That's what I care about. And again, you're going to have to make some assumptions. You're going to have to back them up, but maybe the $50 ink allows you to produce 50% more pages. I don't know. But assuming the price is in a direct relationship is an assumption. So whether I'm buying or selling, now if I'm selling, that I should do some research. Whether I do outside research, do some assumptions, do some what ifs. And again, then you get into probability analysis, and not the time or place to get into that depth, but, reframe the market around what's the average price to print a page is what I would talk about. And if I'm buying, I would ask suppliers, show me your methodology to make this discussion. I'm going to assume that the photocopier for my people that works from home is going to last 3 years. Okay, run an analysis at 3 years and 4 years, so I can run a few different analyses, but give me the information. For people here that work with the consumer side of the world, I'm seeing a lot of changes there. I mean, when I'm buying a $5 widget, I'm probably not doing a lot of research in it, but when I get into the capital cost, buying houses or, big dollar things, I'm seeing this more and more. So I just got this. This is a calculator that's been created to compare the cost of, and I'll still call it the way I always have, the American or North American washers and dryers, the old ones that are top-loaded versus the European ones that are front-loaded. And basically in 2000, the European models started coming to North America. They were priced approximately 40, 50% higher. Siemens, GE, whatever, they all had them. And they weren't taken in the American market. People couldn't get their mind around paying 50% more for a commodity, a washer and dryer. Who cares? I don't care what it looks like or how neat it is. It's buried in my basement. Where maybe in some European houses, they're more visible, noise is more important. And in North America, they kept saying to the consumer, it uses less energy, less water. I hate to say, I don't know what water is worth. I don't know how much water a washer uses. I don't know how much it costs me for the water. So less of something I don't know is irrelevant. And so here's somebody that's tried to put some numbers to it to have the discussion. One of my old bosses went to Best Buy, a retailer, and he said, Todd, the salesperson just walked me through. And what's interesting is whenever he asked me a question that I didn't know the answer, he had a reference point to put up there. Jeff, how many people live at the house? 4. How many loads of laundry do you do a week? I don't know. Okay, based on what we're hearing, a family of 4 with teenagers, I'm making up numbers because I can't remember right now, that's 6 loads of laundry a week. Okay, sounds reasonable. So it's possible to put reasonable assumptions out there and have that discussion. So in this case, again, I won't go through it all, but it's going to do less loads of laundry because it's a bigger machine and it's more efficient doing it. So I've converted, more efficient and less into an annual savings at the bottom, you can see. In this case, a $300 savings. Okay, well, if the washer and dryer costs $500 more, my payback's less than 2 years. I'm going to assume the washer and dryer lasts more than 2 years. So my assumption is a 5 to 10 to 12-year life. Well, the payback's huge. I don't need to argue the exact numbers. I can see the relative impact of the different numbers. GE, again, this is trying to get people to realize, hey, changing your light bulbs to the CFL ones, there's a big dollar impact. Wow. I mean, they've reframed it over the life of it, saying, okay, Todd, now we're talking $2,000. Maybe you should, it's not saving 1 cent a kilowatt. I don't know what a kilowatt is and how many I use, to be honest. I know what $2,000 is. So now now you've incentivized me to actually, when I go buy light bulbs, to buy the different ones. And one of my favorite ones, and I'll tell a quick story. Hopefully this resonates with the European people on the phone. I used to spend a lot of time in London, England, and sometimes leaving London, I would go to Paris. And I had a kind of a process set up. I would be at London Business School with that gentleman, Rob McGuire, and then there was the Heathrow Express. So I could leave downtown. This train ran every 15 minutes and took 15 minutes. So I knew my total time to get to the airport, and I was flying, I think it was BA, and let's just say the ticket cost was $300, no matter whatever pounds or dollars. And one of my colleagues said, Todd, you could save a lot of money and fly, and I can't remember if it was EasyJet or Ryanair. And I said, you want to know what? If it's easy to save money, who cares? Let's do it. I mean, it's an hour flight. These people have to be safe enough. Comfort, it's not a 12-hour international flight. So I said, okay, and I got the ticket, didn't pay attention to it too much. And we're leaving the class, and I was saying goodbye to my friend, and I said, yeah, Rob, I'm off to airport, London airport. What do you mean? I said, where you know, he goes, yo, you're going to Gatwick. I'm like, no, I'm going to Heathrow. He goes, no, you're going to Gatwick, GAT or whatever it was. And I'm like, well, how do I get there? Oh, to heck with it. We're putting you in a black cab because it's a bus to a train to a bus to a, I mean, it's not a feasible. And at that time, the black cabs didn't take credit cards. So he had to pull out 100 pounds and give it to me. I think it was 60 pounds to get there. So now I'm checking in Gatwick. And of course, they're charging me for the bag because I'm in Europe for 10 days. It's a big bag. Eventually get on the plane. It's a short flight. Who cares? One other Coke. That was a pound or whatever it was. Either way, shut my eyes, wake up to the English pilot saying, welcome to Paris. And I look out the window and we're not at De Gaulle, the big airport I'm used to. We're in Orly, Paris. I'm like, Orly, France? No, they call it Paris Airport. Well, wait a minute. At De Gaulle, there's a train in the basement that goes into town, and French traffic is horrendous. Paris traffic is horrendous. So I think it was €5 to jump on the train, get downtown, then you could get to your hotel. Now I'm in Orly. There's only two things I can do. Take 3 different public transport things, which I'm not going to do, a cab again, or rent a car. I'm not renting a car and driving it into Paris and parking it at €50 a day. Either way, I should have looked at the total cost for me leaving my place to getting where I'm going to be and all the costs associated with it. In this case, I took out safety, comfort. Hard dollars, it costs more. This is BA's attempt to do it. So people like that story because it resonates, and sometimes you don't know what problems are until you do them. A bunch of companies, so the logo in the middle, the SKF Document Solutions is my background. Again, a tool, a process. I know that Caterpillar's done a lot of work on this. Rolls-Royce, power by the hour, changing their business model on the aerospace engines. GE, I just showed you some examples. Leverage Point is an amazing tool that allows companies to do this. 20 years ago, they didn't exist, so I had to build my own. But what I tell people now is, and I'm not trying to be commercial here, but don't spend your time building the tool. Spend your time on implementing. The tool is important, but the implementation is where the money happens. Nalco, an Ecolab company, I know they have value champions. I don't remember the exact title, but they put people in place to drive this change, not just building the business case. Ericsson, Swedish company, telecommunications, Abbott in the medical field, Tetra Pak. I mean, just to give you an idea that different industries this is happening. And it's not just a tool to sit there and do the ROI, but once you start capturing that data over time, it helps you prioritize where the value for the customer should be. Walk in and going, I've done this for your industry 800 times. Maybe I've done it for you, same customer, somewhere else in the world. When the customer says, where do you get those numbers? Well, here's the average, here's the min, here's the max. Over time, you get the data to become much more prescriptive and say, even probability, 90% of the time, the ROI is this. I mean, you start maybe with a bunch of what ifs, but over time, as you track what happens. So if you're using a value quantification tool, not only should you propose the value, you should measure what actually happens. So, set yourself in your CRM system or in that system, come back in 5 years. Come back halfway, see if it's working. If not, maybe some tweaks. But then you get the actual savings that you've created. Huthwaite's a big sales organization, global spin selling, but they did a conference, I'm going to say it was a decade ago, it was a long time ago, and they had salespeople talk about how do I sell proactively to procurement and value. But they had procurement in the same room talking about how do I want to buy. And this lady's great. She's now left AstraZeneca, a pharmaceutical company. But, you can read it. My favorite part is, if you can't quantify your value, don't be surprised at the failure of procurement to do so. You still use this slide because, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's not as hard as people think. I've got a process that I use to walk through how to quantify value. And again, not now time-wise to go through it, but, when Salesforce says that procurement person came in and didn't value what we did, well, what was it worth? Well, we're more, okay, then they use words. What numbers to it? If that's all we do is sell whatever we sell, how do we expect the person that buys 20 different types of things to know what those numbers are? They're not going to take that risk. The procurement people are risk averse for numerous reasons, so we've got to do the work. Procurement, how do we get procurement to think differently? I was very lucky years ago at a procurement, a commercial conference to meet a lady, a professor, and she had just released this book here. It's called Vested Sourcing, or Outsourcing, but it's based on a Nobel Economic Prize from 2009 saying, collaboratively contracting together, people make more value. So really focused on that, and very interesting piece of work. The biggest takeaway from the work, you're going to get a white paper that's attached to this, But too often procurement people are focusing on activities and inputs because they can measure them. And what the research says is no, focus on outputs and results or outcomes. Don't tell me, and I've seen some contracts that are 5,000 pages. Let's say you're selling whatever, uptime for a subway system. You know, you're the maintenance team and you're guaranteeing an uptime. Okay, I want you to come every Monday and do this. I want every Tuesday to do this. I want you to keep these parts in stock, whatever. You could write this extremely detailed. And the more detail it is, the more I'm going to do what you told me to do, but the more you've taken away my creativity to solve what you really want, which is more profit. So yes, we have to have that ongoing discussion, but focus on the outcome, not the how-to. You're outsourcing. Outsourcing by definition is the customer doesn't make their own photocopiers themselves. They don't make their own cars themselves. They're outsourcing that to somebody that makes cars for a living. So don't tell them how to make the car. That's what they do for a living. So a great piece of research to kind of challenge procurement. So let's look at the outcomes, not the how, not the number of hours. And one of my favorite examples she used when she was releasing this work is performance guarantees. And in a lot of industries I see where, you know, suppliers are forced to guarantee something like 95% parts availability, 95% response rate, 98%, whatever those things are. And she goes, actually, the problem is that's not going to get you what you want, procurement. So this kind of hits to the point of changing the market's mindset. And she goes, actually, they become a threshold. If you said to Todd, and I was, you know, I presented before she did, and it was amazing how our presentations went so well together. But if you said to Todd, you've got to hit 95%, you know, uptime for these machines, and he's doing the work and he's running the machines, and they're at 91%, so he's 4% short, and the penalty is going to be $1 million because he didn't hit the target. Forget customer happiness and all that type of stuff. Todd, it costs you $10 million to get from where you are to that threshold. Would you do? Would you spend $10 million not to pay $1 million? And then she said, you know, take a customer satisfaction. I said, well, no, that's not rational. So all you're going to get now is that maximum. Because what happens, Todd, when you get to 95%? You're at 95% for this customer, or 91, whatever it is, but you've got an idea. We're going to do this and turn this and change this, and we could get the customer to 98%. So if you're at 95% and it's going to cost you $1,000 to get the customer to 98, which is going to be worth millions of dollars for them, are you going to spend your money to create something you get no return for? Of course not. So by setting performance thresholds with penalties, the stick approach, you're going to cap how much you get. You won't never get over that. People won't exceed it. They'll slow down delivering it to next year. If you say, here's what it is, below it, here's the penalty, above it, here's the reward, you'll get a whole different mentality. Getting procurement to pay bonuses is tough. It's a great story that I use, and again, there's much more slides than just this one, but usually they nod afterward and go, you're right, that makes sense. I love this slide. This is this procurement gentleman. How do people buy? I think it's very important of when you use economic quantification and stuff, because I see people using it at the wrong time. It can be used different ways at different parts of the buying cycle, but I can't remember where I was, and Rob is his name, said, you realize how do I buy? He said, okay, at every sales conference I've gone to, we talk about how we sell, but how do we buy? A need's been identified. We need computers for our sales force. We need company cars. I need a travel policy, whatever it is. A need's been identified. So from the procurement perspective, a specification's been established. I want it from a global supplier. I want it somebody that's been in business this long. I want it, I want gas cars, not electric cars. I'm not saying these are rational specifications, but these are preconceived specifications. I don't want sports cars. I want gas cars. Okay, again. And who could possibly fit this? Based on my past experience, based on my research, these 5 people are possible, but these 4 probably we should talk to. That other one's not even in the game. They don't make that type of thing, or they're not big enough, or they haven't met the qualifications. Then I send the RFP, RFQ for information out to them. You guys as salespeople get this, oh, so-and-so's looking for something, and we run around and respond to what they've asked for. They get the responses from all of us. They negotiate in price and quality and delivery and terms and conditions. They award the contract to 1 or 2 people, and hopefully they manage the contract. How is the contract doing over the life of it? And when I looked at that, I said, okay, that's interesting. I mean, think of this when you have time on your own, if you were buying a car for your own life, kind of walk through this. But his point was very dramatic, that your ability to change what I measure and how I measure it and what I'm going to look for dramatically is reduced over the life cycle of the buying process. If you wait to RFP, RFQ and come in and go, look at total value, look at this, whatever that is, I've already decided what I'm looking at. I'm not going to change what I'm measuring because you've told me to. Don't get me wrong, you can do it, but it's much tougher. And the only way to do it then is not sound like a salesperson, use third-party research to say, here's what you should be doing, but it's much tougher. How much time and effort is your organization doing getting that marketing ahead of time so that when people are talking about buying whatever they're buying, they're thinking differently. The white papers, the thought leadership, the conferences, people don't want to be sold to, but they love to learn. So getting in early there makes a big difference. Last part of the procurement side of it, my closing slide, and you're going to get access to this, that why should suppliers buy this way? Manufacturers Alliance for Productivity and Innovations, a North American think tank, 500 and something big industrial companies. The Caterpillar, people, John Deere, SKF, etc., NSK are all involved. But they did a survey of chief procurement officers. It's now 5 years old, but they asked them, do you measure and buy on total profit added? Uptime, energy, OPEX cost, disposal cost, like all these things. If you remember that 4-stage slide, I gave that to them and said, do you measure yes or no and make your decisions on this? And then they looked afterwards, the publicly traded companies, which most of them are, that bought on best value were 35% more profitable. So perfect piece of research. The Vested book, which is based on the 2009 economic prize winner, talks about the value of buying this way. State of Flux is a consultancy, UK-based, but it kind of goes back to that ceiling floor example. People that buy this way get 4 to 6% over what's contracted. You've contracted to deliver 95%. People that contract and reward people properly get 4 to 6% above that, because I can't stop as I go above 95%. It's just going to happen. Whether it's 96 or 96 and a half. And then you'll see some quotes. So like I said, the book's got some examples, but two North American people, very well respected, saying we've got to think differently. So again, it's not me going into a customer saying buy differently. It's saying, hey, here's some new research, here's some new ideas. Let's have a discussion, a workshop around where we can really impact all these things. So pricing, we set a price, but how do we get that price from the marketplace, and how does value quantification tie into it? Different pricing models. A lot of industrial companies use cost base. And at some point, you need to know what your cost is, but taking the cost and marking it up is not the way to be profitable long term. Or you hear that your competition's X and you're 5% above X or 5% below X. Now, there's two value-based pricing, and Andreas Hinterhuber is also one of the editors of that book. And I know that the diagram isn't great, but value-based selling is when you proactively use the business case to say, Mr. Customer, based on my experience, if you buy this, here's the payback you should get. And the value is ex ante. So they pay you the $100,000 to buy whatever you're selling. They get all the value, whether it's less than that or more than that, they get all the risk and reward. So value selling, again, are you writing the business case saying we think this and think this, and here's the payback? But performance-based is also value, which says give me X up front, but the bonus will be based on how much value is created. So I like the way he split those two areas up. And I think variable pricing, the Uberization, will be coming to our marketplaces and businesses to businesses. Disney's changed how they do some pricing. Do we treat all customers the same way? Some customers don't plan in advance, are constantly reactive. Do we price differently to them because of the way we interact? Because they do cost us more. So using value quantification, this is where Leverage Point started with. I'll let them speak to their expertise in this area, but that's how I got to know them years ago. We are launching a new product. And how many times people have launched products that haven't been successful because they haven't got the value proposition right. So this is my process, but sitting there with a calculator saying, what would be the value for the customer to buy a machine that runs 2% less energy? And again, the value will be different by different industries or by different labor rates, but I'm going to get a bunch of scatter plots all over the place. One guy's $17 value, one's 15, one's 13, one's 16. I can change some variables, do some different sensitivities. So there's a big range there. Then I say, okay, we know that there's a range between $13 and $20 of value depending on the customer segment. What's my cost to produce? Okay, if the cost to produce exceeds the value spot, stop. There's no way you're going to make money. Just stop right there. But here there's a magnitude of difference. Okay, I know it's costing me $270 to produce 1,000 widgets, and there's some guy that thinks it's worth $13, $115, $117. So there's a magnitude to move forward here. You should set the sales price somewhere between what the customer perceives as the value and what they're paying for you. And a lot of times, if you read pricing books, they'll say that you should charge $15. You shouldn't. The closer you charge to their perceived value, the less incentive you've incentivized them. It's also called the value surplus to the customer, is the difference between what they pay and what they perceive. So in this case, I'm saying spend $12. Their perception is $15. Okay, fine. I'm getting more value than what I paid for. Paid as part of the cost is part of that value conversation. And then, as you work on increasing the value for the customer, you thought it was 15, but we did an ROI analysis. It's really 17. If you use the product or service this way, it would be worth 19. I mean, you got to get into the how. So as you create more value to the customer, you can increase the price. And I got a bunch of examples around this, but we won't go through all of them. Then you get into the performance-based pricing. So I used to be with SKF, and they had a whole group that was, I would say, 100% pay for performance, just to keep it simple. Think of outsourcing your IT to a company. Okay, what was your total spend in this area last year? We'll take the people, the parts, everything, and we'll do it for less. It's an immediate savings. But as we make it better, whatever better is, we get rewarded. Funny enough, and I've talked to numerous different industries, this doesn't seem to gain as much traction as you thought it would. There's a lot of variables to calculate. Customers are like, wait, that's my core competency. I'm not willing to give up all that. I don't know you. I don't trust you. I think there's also, and I hate to say the North American mindset of the legal contract. You'd have to write 5 million variables in here. What if the plant got hit by lightning? What happened if there was a strike? What happened? So again, the way the contracts are written. So I don't think there's as much adoption. I think the best way, if you want to move this way, is to start small and grow. For example, I don't think companies woke up one day and said, we're outsourcing all of our IT. They outsourced a little bit at a time, and the more they got comfortable with it, the more it became 100% outsource. Because that's core competency of ours. Okay, now they've outsourced it. Travel. Companies used to have travel departments now. So over time, don't just go for the full 100% offer. Start with smaller offers that you can expand on. Look at an application, look at a part of the facility, look at a part of the offering, whatever it is. But I think you also give customers different options. So the one on the right, I call it a hybrid. It's kind of halfway through that says, okay, pay me my price up front. But this is for big customers, not for everybody, but for large key account customers. But I'm going to guarantee you some value every year. And trust me, me giving you 10% value every year is worth more than a 10% price cut. I got a bunch of slides, but don't have time to go through all the examples there. But getting the customer to go, okay, I understand that's better for me. 10% value every year is better than a 10% price cut. But we need to agree upon what counts as value. Do you care about labor? Do you care about energy? So we have to define that. We have to agree on how do we calculate it. Again, because our program had been around so long, people kind of just said, okay, we believe it. It's got different academic people that have followed it and said it's a best-in-class example. What's the sign-off process for it? I'm not going to do a bunch of work to save you labor, and at the end of the year you say, I don't care about labor. Or at the end of the year say, we think energy is worth 1 cent a kilowatt, and you say it's 20 cents a kilowatt. Now, I'm not saying you have to get it to the exact cent, but reasonable estimations is a place to start. Because just think you're saving labor. Are you saving this level of person's labor or that level of person's? Okay, fine. Let's split the difference, call it even, 25 euros an hour. Some of them are 20, some of them are 32. Okay. So again, the more, this isn't an accounting standard. It's about trying to prioritize where the greatest impact is going to be with the customers. And my favorite quote, if your CEO asks about value-based agreements, and I'm not paraphrasing, I'm actually quoting, how many ways do you have to discount? And salespeople, and I'm one of them, can become very creative. Volume discounts, new client discounts, test market discount, whatever. Just go figure out what do you have a process in place for a discount? Above this amount, it needs to go to this manager, then, et cetera, et cetera. If you have processes to discount, why do you not have processes to guarantee value? So instead of, I'll just say, going from $100 to $90, no customer, it's $100, but I guarantee you $10 a year profit impact. I've actually got no incremental risk in this scenario. I've got labor associated with it, but again, these are big clients my team's already working with. So maybe I should have processes not to discount. That's one of my favorite quotes. So over the years, these are people that have just done work on it. So when you're back internally trying to get adoption and buy-in, or you're with clients trying to get them to think differently. So academic, And, on the pricing side, the value side, IMD is a big European school that I do a lot of work with, but they have a global procurement conference once every 3 years that I go speak at. University of Tennessee, I go to their supply chain conference, how to buy value. And I can tell you, it's a variation of this presentation, but there's no secrets. I'm telling you the same thing. These are procurement organizations that have had me come speak. The top one's government. It says global, but it's very North American. PASIA is Asia. IBE Corp was Brazil. LOSI is Finland. IACCM is global. I mean, these are procurement organizations that, Todd, we need to get value from our suppliers. How do we know which ones really bring it? How do we measure it? How do we negotiate for it? Government's changing their rules to say it's not 3 bids and a buy. We have to buy best value. So that's being written into more contracts. They have to define what value is. OPEX cost, energy cost, et cetera, et cetera. In the orange white paper you'll have access to, this is a great example of a bridge being built in North America. The price to build the bridge was $60 million, or 30% more expensive, but they got the contract because they could demonstrate other areas of value for the state that built the bridge. And on the far right side, I've started to spend even more time with big consulting companies that are going into clients. So Deloitte's had me at their global procurement strategy meeting saying, what's the next level? Once we get customers to understand what they buy, where they buy it from, consolidate the information, use SAP or whatever to harness that, what's the next level? So again, trying to change the marketplace to think differently. Won't go through all these, but this is my closing slide. From the selling side, I said earlier, people that buy this way are 35 or 36% more profitable. People that sell this way, bunch of examples, monitor Deloitte, people that take the value strategy and do it well are 24% more profitable than people that take the value strategy and don't do it well. But both those value strategies are worth 10 to 20% more profitability than the people who take the volume, good enough approach. It speeds up the business because if you're not writing the business case why they should spend $100,000 with you, they've got to do it to compete against your competitors or other alternatives. They're not going to do it as well as you're going to do it. So it speeds that up. There's less discounting. Customers are happier. They can say to their boss every year, I've got more value from the supplier. So again, different places, you'll see different statistics there. So yes, as we get to the end, I've tried to get across, again, so your new market, your new product development process, a challenge. What would this be worth for the customer? Do they care about that? And if not, that's called a value placeholder, but okay, can we make some economic stuff? Is it tied into your value selling process? Are you being early? Are you getting out there and getting the market to think differently? Or is it just a checkbox? If it's a checkbox, it won't work. It's not being adopted. Have the tool, work on the tool. I would say, use somebody that's a professional at it, unless you're a software person, but every hour you're spending on trying to create a tool, you're not out implementing it to realize the benefit from it. And again, that's retrospective, looking back for all the years of the tool that we built. Great tool, but too much energy was focused there. We should have been out in the marketplace. Constantly driving it again. You see more and more companies have commercial excellence managers, but different people saying, we've got to get better at getting that message out. Work on giving your customers different buying options. Some days I want to buy a car. Some days I want to lease a car. Some days I want to take Uber. Don't tell me how to buy. Give me choices. When you get into pricing, you can move people which one they choose, but there's ways to do it. Your internal culture. The statistics. One of my favorites, it's from a huge study that was done for the World Economic Forum. The 3 things to companies that are successful over the last 40 years are companies that take the value approach and get paid for the value. Again, very big study. And then, enable your customers to buy this way. Get them to think differently. Maybe, you are strategic. Maybe you can make a big difference in their profitability. So as my last, here's my email up top and the website. Some great videos on the websites and white papers to look at. Price will be an issue in the absence of value. But as I said, that value better be quantified. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it's got to start somewhere and people can move off of it. But if it's not quantified, I'm not willing to pay for it. The book, honestly, I'm not here to sell books, but again, what I love about it's got a bunch of stories in it that are from our worlds of how to implement this. If you happen to buy it, actually, Amazon, put a review up. That would be greatly appreciated. And I try my best when I can to pop some stuff out on LinkedIn on where I'm speaking or different new research. So if you want to follow, great. And with that, Taylor, I'll go back to you to close up, and then we can get to some questions. Okay, people? So
great. Thank you so much, Todd. Yeah, I'll try to cruise through this so we can get to your questions. And we've had a few questions come in so far during the webinar, but there's still time to enter your question into the panel on your screen. If we don't get to it today, we can always follow up via email. While you're entering, a reminder to complete that 10-second survey while exiting today's webinar to be entered into the raffle for giving away one free copy of Value First Then Price. Now to give you a couple more minutes to enter your questions, a few words on leverage point. Forrester research states the first vendor to succeed in communicating a vision to value to executives wins the business 74% of the time. So how can you guarantee that you'll be that vendor? Well, your sales team needs to bring their approach into the 21st century, meaning it must be value-focused, customer-centric, and digital. The traditional sales approach was created to educate a buyer, but today's buyers are more educated than ever, spending more than 60% of their buying process researching online before ever even talking to a rep. Do away with the standard corporate overview, long PowerPoint presentation, extensive questioning, and features and benefits review. Instead, create a crisp digital presentation that highlights what you're actually going to deliver to that customer, qualitatively, quantitatively, and financially. Present data that can be revised to the prospect so the prospect can visualize financial results and leave behind a unique presentation that's tailored to them. Sounds great, right? But where do you start? Well, the answer is case studies. Old school sales and marketing reps have generated a plethora of amazing content that our buyers want to read, but it's static and it frequently gets lost in the shuffle. Case studies are a prime example. They very clearly give you a crisp background and a challenge, then get straight into solutions and financial results. Buyers download them from your website. They ask for them after a sales call, and they make buying decisions based off of the financial results displayed. So why are your salespeople only using them as a leave behind? Why are we leaving behind something that gets to the point fast and proves your value and convinces a buyer to buy? Maybe it's because they're not digital, but now they can be. Embedding this information into your sales presentation is the only way to be the first vendor to communicate a vision to value. And remember, according to Forrester, that vendor wins the business 74% of the time. I took some screenshots of our interactive sales presentation tool to give you an example. This is a digital presentation. Everything you can see can be customized live for the prospect. This is a fictional example where we embedded an existing static case study into the presentation. To start, we frame the customer's challenge. After providing industry insights, we jump into the solutions that are provided to a similar customer within that case study. Business productivity improvements, risk mitigation, IT infrastructure cost savings, and IT staff productivity benefits. We then get straight to financial results, quantifying the value that was delivered from each solution. Again, all of this is customizable. Although the information came from a case study for a customer similar to the prospect on the line, you might find that the prospect wants to change a few numbers to better match their company. With a digital presentation, all of that's doable, then and there. Recalculating the total value delivered and creating a presentation completely unique to the prospect on the line. So if you found any of that interesting, we'd love to have you enter into a raffle we're doing every single month where we will digitally transform one of your case studies free of charge. Just check the corresponding box in the exit survey upon leaving today's webinar or email us at casestudies@leveragepoint.com. All right, that's it for me. And we've got some great questions. Like I said, first and foremost, yes, this webinar is recorded and the slides and recording will be emailed to you within 2 business days. All right, Todd, here's the first one for you. So this all sounds great, but why don't companies do this?
I get that question a lot. I mean, I think companies are trying to understand what their value is, but they don't invest in, putting a group together that says, okay, how are we going to look at this and really make sure it happens? They're looking at each little aspect all the time, not holistically. So they might have the case studies. They might have the corporate presentation. They might have done a CRM system. They might have a white paper, but there's nobody tying it all together and saying, okay, this is how we're really going to get the financial difference in the marketplace.
Absolutely. So in successful organizations, who usually quantifies this value?
Good question. I think to begin with, to build the tool, so going to your tool, to build that case study in there, I'm going to say it's the product expert, the product manager. They know that product or the industry expert of where that's going to be applied. Say it's a difference for the travel industry or whatever. To really say these are the value benefits, have the third-party person. This was part of my job, is to challenge them. What do you mean by more reliable? What's that worth? But the experts to help build the case and the tool and the system, but to put it into the system on a regular basis, it's the people in the field, the sales force in the field. You know, as I've always said, is I don't create value. I'm a head office person. I've never gone in and turned a wrench and changed something to make a machine run better. That's what the people do that are smart. So they're the people, you know, making the improvements. They're the ones that need to go into the system and calculate that value. Doesn't mean they shouldn't have access to an expert to help them, you know, or questions or something like that. But in general, the whole field organization, products, service, field experts, etc., should be the ones using the system on a day-to-day basis. Marketing, last point, should be able in there extracting what are the key insights we're learning from this. Maybe we're seeing maybe we're seeing a big impact in this industry. Maybe we can replicate that. It's a great place to pull and generate some great insights.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so here's another question for you. With a lot of companies that look at this exercise skeptically, how do you get the value conversation started?
And I guess there's two ways to look at that: the customer skepticism and the internal skepticism. So I'm not sure which way the person's asking the question. Let me start with internally. You know, I got lucky. I mean, it started as a side project, like most things do, but then we got some successes, and it built from there. But you know, if I'm working with an organization on the internal side, trying to transform them to it, I can tell you the market's moving this way. The power of procurement is rising. The power of the economic buyers rising, and they want a business case. So, I mean, if you're looking at long-term customers you've had, we've created value and you're losing them, where discussions are on discounts, where you're losing business that you thought you were the lead person, I mean, it's because we're not doing this. So, you know, getting the mindset that this is the way the world's going, these value models are the way the world's going, they need to quantify it the way the world is going. So that's internally really getting that step change. I'm going to go see a client in a few months, but I've got their whole executive team for 2 days. And to get the C-level in a room for 2 days is a lot, but they've realized they need to kind of commit to this because all the one-off projects aren't getting the value. They need that big, you know, all buy into it and all make it a overall company-wide initiative. I mean, you might start in a division, you might start in a geography, you might start in a product like I did, but eventually it needs to become a company-wide initiative. For the client buying perspective, I mean, and I don't have it up here, but somebody email me and I'll send it to you, or Google Kralik Matrix. Krajik or something. It's a very famous piece of research that was done in the early 80s in Harvard Business Review, but it said, you know, when procurement people are thinking of supply chain, where do they put their different buckets of goods? You know, should they spend the time doing the research to figure out the value, buying on value, or should it be a leveraged 3 bids and a buy? And, you know, I use that to try to get marketplaces to stop and think, because they've made a lot of assumptions when they say, and I don't know if we have anybody on the line for office supplies. So people could say for office supplies, it's transactional, it's substitutable, it's not high risk. Those are all assumptions. If I was in that business, I would have to change the payment model and try to say, you know, there's a different profit impact here. We can have that discussion. So we need to get those insights, to get them to the client different ways. Again, the white papers, the conferences, etc., different ways to get it out there. So they go, wait, I haven't thought of it that way. That's interesting. Okay, now let's have a discussion of how that applies to me. Again, if you're waiting for the RFP to come in and try to get them and say, look over here. I mean, and I used to get that phone call a lot, and we got very lucky. Again, and I use a lot of third-party examples, which adds the credibility. But, you know, it's tougher to get someone to change once they've made a decision. It's, you're a salesperson, you're getting me to look somewhat differently. So, you know, just decided, quick example, in the whole world, there's procurement conferences in organizations, and if you notice, my term was Vice President of Value. I mean, maybe I was doing business development, but if I'm business development, I can't go into a procurement conference and be seen as somebody that's there to exchange best practices. So I wanted to have that discussion, and it's great where people brought me in and said, how do I think differently about how I buy some stuff? So spend time internally and externally, and I think different tools and techniques need to be used. Hopefully some of the slides, again, you're getting a very short version, help show you what's it worth to do it on the sell side, but also customers. Let's think differently, and what's it worth to engage me differently to create value? It's worth a lot more.
Absolutely. And I know we've run over here, but I'm going to squeeze in 2 more questions since we do have still a good amount of attendees on the line. And if we don't get to your question today, we will follow up via email. But next one for you, let's see. How do you guarantee value if your key value proposition is not cost savings?
Okay, and I'd have to be more specific. So, I mean, if it's a risk reduction, if it's speed of response, I mean, if somebody wants to have to, funny enough, a lot of times you can quantify things, you just have to do it differently. And sometimes, I didn't have the example in here, it's an assumption, a reframe as they call it around something different. But again, I'm not just talking about cost savings, I'm talking about revenue improvement. So, revenue improvement being, so I didn't use the example, but for the high-tech industry, speed to market is everything. If you're launching a new phone, getting that back-to-school buying cycle, at least in North America, they talk about it all the time. So, if you could help that person, be earlier to the market or something, that's worth everything. If you're in the pharmaceutical industry, they've only got a protection for, I think it's 10 years, I don't know. But I mean, every month ahead of that, you can do this is worth between this and this. So sometimes it's just, I mean, it could be worth X or Y. And this is that prescriptive, value selling ahead of time, saying, we don't know the exact number, but we know that the value far exceeds the cost. And I love when I've had clients come back to me and say, well, your number's wrong. The value's more, or the value's, hey, the value far exceeds the investment. It's a go. So if somebody wants to send me an email directly on that, there's probably something there. And if not, maybe changing the way the business model is around it so that it is more focused that way.
Yeah, and we have, Leverage Point has a lot of good content around intangible value drivers. We actually have an on-demand webinar that you can access in our resource center from November 2017, full hour-long webinar all on intangible value drivers. That's really great. All right, last question for you, Todd. Let's see. What are some, and if any, externally observable characteristics of firms that might be most responsive to value-based conversations regarding potential purchase of a vendor solution? So,
okay. Okay, yeah, so if you've got 100 customers, where do you go first? And I just go by my experience. I mean, if there's a customer that's big enough, so the worst opportunity, worth your time and investment, and they've been buying on price, I always wanted that to be one of my opportunities, because I've got to go in there and change the conversation. Going in there and just trying to argue I'm better all the time. I mean, you've got to be proactive, you've got to be aggressive, you've got to be C-level, you've got to go in with some risk-reward stuff. So, I mean, if someone's been buying the client base that you have, they've been buying differently, that's one thing. Number two, go into LinkedIn. And just a side note, I mean, procurement people taught me this. They look at our profiles before we go in to see them. They'll pay for that version where we don't know that they've been looking at us, whatever that's called. But they want to know, who are these people coming in and what are they going to talk about? But what I found, again, I got called into conversations doing the same thing, finding out, wait, this chief procurement officer, real quick story, happened to go to the University of Michigan, and the professor that ran the procurement department's name at the time was Thomas Choi. So when I walked in to meet her after the introductions, I said to her, procurement people, they get into it all from different worlds. I mean, the finance background, there's always a story. They said, how long have you been in the procurement, leading the procurement team here, and how did you get there? And she said, I can't remember, I came up, she went to Michigan, and I said, oh, was Professor Choi there when you were? And she said, yes, Professor Choi was. I said, oh, well, Tom is now at Arizona State. He runs chartered caps. And I was just doing some co-research with him. The whole conversation changed. I wasn't another sales rep pushing something down her throat. I was coming at with a discussion from somebody that she thought of was interesting. So again, this is being at the conferences, getting them to come to your conclusion differently, not trying to push them there. If their customers are always buying on price, being proactive, and maybe that is a call to the CEO. As I would say, if there's a big client that's always buying on price, not buying from you, and you've done a little bit of work, I don't expect you to spend zillions of dollars doing the research ahead of time, but a phone call that says, I think that I'm making up numbers now, but a $5 to an $8 million EBITDA improvement for your company annually, I just can't get the audience to have that discussion. It's amazing how, that'll have a different, you might get around the person that's being the blocker. And a lot of times I'll find out that the C-level will say, well, I wanted our company to buy value, but somehow that transition from buying on value to buying on price. The way things are interpreted get changed on the way down. So some just different ways. And that's what the big consulting companies do. they'll have some ranges of impact for different industries and say, you know, you're missing out this year this much money by not listening to our discussion. And when you frame it as a loss, it's like, okay, well, show me how. And then you better be willing to guarantee some of it. Because if you go in there and you're not, and you're expecting to pay a higher price, they say, okay, well, you're willing to get paid based on that, and you say no, it's going to be a little hollow. So it doesn't mean 100% risk reward, but some fee at risk, I think will change that discussion.
Absolutely. All right, well, that is definitely all the time we have for today. We really appreciate you guys sticking with us 10 minutes past. Before you go, a reminder to register for next month's webinar during the exit survey. Peyton Marshall, LeveragePoint's chairman and CEO, is back to discuss value propositions through the B2B sales cycle. When, how, and why do buyers commit? And that is it from us for today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us, and a special thank you to Todd for your insights. From all of us here at LeveragePoint, have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.